Hey everyone, George here. So I get this question every now and then, which is if I were to lease my vehicle, would I qualify for depreciation? Which is, of course, tax-wise the more advantageous thing. And the quick answer to that is no. No, you won't, unfortunately. However, there are exceptions to that rule when a lease would qualify you for the depreciation. And we're going to go over what those exceptions are and what all that would entail. So, let's get started. So the general rule is that if you were to purchase a vehicle, either through cash, financing, or some combination, you would be entitled to the depreciation deductions, Section 179 and bonus, to the extent that you qualify. And if you were to lease a vehicle, you would only be able to take as a deduction the lease payments that you make every month. And while that is generally true, 99% of the time, there are few exceptions where you would be able to depreciate a lease. And that's what we're going to go over today. So most leases are what's called an operating lease. And this is a standard vehicle lease, nothing too crazy, nothing funky going on. However, there is something called a capital lease. Now, under an operating lease, you don't get to take any Section 179, you don't get to take any bonus depreciation, you don't get the ownership of the vehicle, and you do get to deduct the monthly lease payment every month that you make that payment. Now, there's 4 triggers that can actually qualify you for a capital lease. In a capital lease, the IRS looks at the actual lease agreement and says, although this is called the lease, in substance, you're taking ownership of it, and therefore this is more like akin to a financing transaction. Now, if you do qualify for a capital lease, you can take Section 179, you can take bonus depreciation. You don't get to deduct the monthly payments outside of interest expense. However, the deduction for the value of the vehicle that you're getting through depreciation is far greater than the actual lease payments. Now, what are those 4 criteria that could trigger a capital lease? Number 1 is a bargain purchase option. If your lease agreement allows you to buy the vehicle at the end of the lease term for a very small nominal amount, call it usually it's $1 or $10, the IRS views that as effectively a financing transaction. And in that case, this is the most common scenario where you have bargain purchase option element. In this case, this lease would be viewed as a financing transaction, therefore you could take the depreciation in the year of purchase. The second thing that can trigger a capital lease is if you're required to purchase the vehicle at the end of the lease term. If the contract basically requires you to take ownership at the end of the lease term, the IRS views that as you having taken ownership. Therefore, again, you would be entitled to the depreciation deductions. The third trigger that can cause you to call this a capital lease is if the lease payment term is at least as long or greater than the useful life of the vehicle. And for all intents and purposes, although we know that some people use vehicles like 10, 15, 20 years, for IRS purposes, the maker's schedule basically calls the useful life of a vehicle as 5 years. So if your lease term is 60 months or greater, then you would be deemed as the owner of that vehicle, even though technically it's a lease. And you would qualify for capital lease treatment, in which case you can capitalize and take the depreciation of the value of that vehicle in the year of purchase. And finally, the 4th trigger for capital lease treatment is if the present value of all the payments you're going to make for the lease are equal to or greater than 90% of the fair value of that vehicle, meaning the purchase price of that vehicle. If the lease payments you're making and discounted to present value status, and this is something you can reach out to us, reach out to CPA for, if that amount is greater than 90% of the value of the vehicle, then this would actually qualify as a capital lease, in which case you can capitalize it and take the depreciation. So again, to recap, either if there's a bargain purchase option, if there's a written requirement to buy the vehicle, if the lease term is equal to or greater than the actual life of the vehicle, or 5 years in the IRS's view, the life of the vehicle, or if the present value of all the payments are greater than or equal to 90% of the value of that vehicle. if any one of these hold, you can take depreciation on the lease, believe it or not. So let's go over a few examples here of when we would be able to call a lease a capital lease and take depreciation. So number one example, if it's a 36-month lease term, you return the car at the end of the lease term, and your buyout option is at fair market value, and basically you're deemed to have no ownership rights, and in this case all you can deduct is that monthly lease payment. You can't take depreciation. Now in this second example, we have a 48-month lease term, and at the end of the lease term you have a $1 buyout. So in this case, you are deemed effectively the owner. This is considered a financing transaction in the view of the IRS, and you could capitalize this vehicle on your balance sheet and take full depreciation for it to the extent that you're allowed. Number three example, if you have a high dollar SUV over 6,000 pounds with a $1 buyout option, again, this would qualify as a capital lease, and you could deduct effectively the full value of the vehicle if you purchased it in 2025 and going forward, or if you placed it in service in 2025 going forward. So again, it's usually tax-wise, and I tell my clients, don't let the tail wag the dog. So do what's in your best interest, in your business's best interest. However, if you're gonna think about tax considerations, generally, especially in 2025 going forward, now that we're given 100% bonus back, it is beneficial to purchase a vehicle so that you can expense the full value of the vehicle in the year of purchase. However, if you must lease, try to talk to the dealer about considerations outside of a standard lease term. Like the most common example I've seen is a $1 buyout. That's the most common example for vehicles. Or you could talk to them about any of these other three triggers that could potentially be included as well. And these are the only ways you can actually take depreciation on a lease. So I hope you found this helpful. Reach out with any questions, click like, subscribe, turn on notifications for any updates, and I hope to see you in the next one.